It had been nearly 3 decades since the class photo was taken. A cheerful group of kids in matching uniforms, standing proudly in front of a yellow school bus. At the time, it seemed like just another school memory. But what followed turned that photo into something far more haunting. One crisp autumn morning, that entire class along with their teacher and bus driver vanished without a trace. No witnesses, no signs of struggle. Just an empty bus parked by the roadside. For years, families were left with nothing but questions and grief. Authorities chased countless leads, but every trail went cold. The case became one of the most disturbing unsolved school disappearances in history. Now, 27 years later, one mother who never stopped searching has uncovered something no one else noticed. While looking through old belongings, she found a copy of the class photo, but this wasn't the original everyone had seen. There was a detailed, barely visible something unsettling hiding in the background. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but the more she looked, the more certain she became. This tiny clue could change everything. Why was this detail ignored? Who altered the original photo? And why now, after all these years, is someone trying to erase it again? She knew she couldn't keep it to herself, but the moment she shared it, things started happening. Calls from blocked numbers. Items moved around in her home, and the feeling that someone was always one step behind her. Her name was Linda Carver, and she had been only 29 when her daughter, Emily, vanished with the rest of the class. Over the years, Linda had appeared in news, interviews, joined search parties, even traveled across states chasing leads, but nothing ever brought her closer to the truth. Most of the other parents had moved on, or at least tried to. Some relocated, others kept their grief private. But Linda, she kept every article, every photo, every police report. Her living room had turned into a quiet shrine of unanswered questions. The photo she rediscovered had been buried inside a worn-out journal, one that once belonged to Emily. It was the same group photo everyone remembered, except for one thing. In the bus window, just above the children's heads, there was a shadowy figure. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't a child. It was something out of place. When Linda took the photo to the authorities, they dismissed it, calling it print damage or a light distortion, but she knew better. And so did one other person, Mr. Donnelly, the former school janitor, who'd retired 2 decades ago after the disappearance. When Linda reached out to him, his voice trembled on the phone. He told her there were things we weren't allowed to talk about, things we were told to forget. Before he could say more, he hung up. That night, Linda noticed her mailbox had been pried open, and inside, she found something new. Another photo, one she had never seen before. The second photo was chilling. It looked like it had been taken moments after the original class photo, same setting, same students, but with one disturbing difference. The teacher who had once stood proudly beside the children was no longer smiling. Her expression was blank, almost lifeless, and her eyes were looking somewhere off camera, as if she'd just seen something horrifying. One of the children, Miley, was missing from the lineup entirely. Linda stared at the image, her hands shaking. It wasn't edited. The photo looked old, its edges yellowed, the colors faded. But how could it exist when no one had ever seen it before? Linda reached back out to Mr. Donnelly, leaving voicemails, texts, even driving past his home. He didn't respond. Then, 2 days later, she learned from a neighbor that he'd suddenly packed up and left town without saying a word. Around the same time, strange things began happening online. Posts from missing persons forums about the 1990s school vanishing were being deleted. A blog she remembered reading years ago, written by another parent, had been wiped clean. It was like someone was slowly erasing the entire case. Meanwhile, Linda's son, Tyler, born years after Emily disappeared, started having vivid dreams. He described places he'd never visited, names he shouldn't know, and once he mentioned a woman with a gray coat and a long scar on her hand, watching him from behind a school bus. Linda hadn't told him anything, and yet, somehow, Tyler knew more than he should. Linda couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The second photo, the vanishing records, Mr. Donnelly's sudden disappearance at all, pointed to something far deeper than a simple missing persons case. She started digging into archived school records, yearbooks, even bus logs from the week of the disappearance. That's when she found something even stranger. A substitute teacher had signed in that day someone no one remembered hiring. No ID, no background check, no full name. Just the initials RL and a shaky signature. But what shook her the most was the note scribbled beside it. Cleared for pickup, special request. At night, Tyler's dreams were getting worse. He began sleepwalking, murmuring names Linda had never mentioned out loud. Ms. Gale, the broken window, under the bus. When she tried recording his sleep talk, the audio always cut out around the same time right after he'd say the word bus. On a hunch, Linda revisited the now-abandoned school where Emily had once studied. The grounds were fenced off, the buildings crumbling, but the old bus shed still stood. Inside, covered in layers of dust and rust, sat a single yellow school bus. Its tires had sunk halfway into the ground, but the door creaked open when she pulled it. The inside smelled of mildew and metal. At the back, scratched into the wall, were names. Every missing child, and just beneath them, in smaller letters, asterisk, they were never meant to leave. Asterisk. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate. Someone else was in the shed. Linda froze. The sound of footsteps echoed in the shed's soft, steady, too calm to be random. She ducked behind one of the bus seats, heart pounding, breath shallow. A shadow passed by the narrow row of windows. Someone was circling the bus. Then the creaking of the door again, this time closing slowly. Whoever was out there didn't want her leaving. She waited, clutching her phone, but there was no signal. Seconds felt like minutes. When silence finally returned, she inched her way back down the aisle and peeked out. The shed was empty, but on the inside of the door, something new had appeared. It was a photo taped right where she couldn't miss it. A freshly printed copy of the class photo. But now, all the children's faces were blacked out. All except one, Tyler's. Linda staggered back, her mind spinning. How could Tyler be connected to something that happened before he was born? Unless, it wasn't just about the past. It was still happening. Maybe the children hadn't vanished completely. Maybe they'd been taken somewhere, held or hidden. And now, whoever was behind it wanted Tyler too, back home. She tore through Emily's old journals, searching for anything she might have missed. On the last page, in faded ink, were 3 words: "It follows blood." Linda didn't know what it meant at first. But then she remembered Emily and Tyler shared the same rare birthmark. Same location, same shape. And that's when she realized Tyler was next. Linda didn't wait. That same night, she packed a bag, took Tyler, and drove out of town to Ward. The place that kept coming up in Emily's writings, and abandoned campground near the state border. It had been closed since the early 90s, around the same time the class vanished. Tyler, unusually quiet, stared out the window the entire ride. As they arrived, the boy whispered, "They're still here." Linda's stomach turned. The air around the campground felt colder, heavier. Nature had reclaimed the buildings, but something about the clearing near the woods felt untouched, preserved, like it had been waiting. As they stepped out, Tyler walked straight toward a rusted-out shed. Linda followed, heart racing. Inside, it looked like a classroom frozen in time. Desks, backpacks, even old lunchboxes still. in place. On the back wall was a mural-painted version of the class photo, but with adult-sized shadows standing behind each child. Tyler pointed to one and said, "That's the man from my dreams." Suddenly, a deafening sound filled the room like wind rushing through sealed windows. The mural began to shift. The shadows peeled from the wall, forming outlines in the air. Linda grabbed Tyler and backed away, but he turned to her and calmly said, "They're not here for me. They want you." For a second, everything stopped. Then, just like that, the air went still. The next morning, hikers found Tyler alone near the road, confused but unharmed. No sign of Linda, but in his hand was an old, faded photo. And this time, he was the one missing from it. Weeks passed, and Tyler was placed under observation while authorities tried to understand what happened. He had no memory of the night in the woods, just flashes of light, voices he couldn't place, and a strong feeling of being watched. Linda was officially listed as missing, but those who knew her believed she had made a choice. Somehow, in that strange moment at the campground, she had traded place, severing herself in exchange for her son. It didn't make sense on paper, but nothing about this case ever had. Investigators reopened the 27-year-old file. The resurfacing of Tyler and the newly discovered photographs gave them fresh leads, but much of the evidence still pointed to something they couldn't explain. The abandoned classroom, when revisited, was completely empty. No desks, no mural. Just dust and silence. But deep in the woods, etched into a tree, were all the children's names, including Linda's.